You know, it's with great pleasure that I introduce to you today Professor Len Findlay of the University of Saskatchewan. Professor Findlay, for those of you who don't know, is a member of the English department of Saskatchewan, where he's an award-winning teacher of Victorian literature and Canadian studies. His wide-ranging, politically driven research and teaching also focus on issues of indigeneity in Canada and the university as a locus and focus of inquiry. He has been involved with COUT's Academic Freedom and Tenure Committee for the last decade, and he is currently that committee's chair. And his involvement with associations has been long. As I learned in conversation with him last night, he actually helped to write the very first collective agreement for the University of Saskatchewan. And his work on behalf of universities in Saskatchewan has included stints as senior policy analyst for the Saskatchewan government. His commitment to collegial governance has had him involved over the years, not only with the University of Saskatchewan's Faculty Association, but also its Faculty Senate, of which he is currently a member, and he is a member of the Royal Society of Canada. I believe you will hear a little bit more about Professor Findlay's work in various capacities in the course of his talk today for the connection between teaching, academic research, the shaping of the institutions in which we do our work, and our relationship to Canada's publics is vital to Professor Findlay as an activist academic. I believe he has another name for his activities that he may share with you later. You know, it is challenging for an association such as ours, which has 7 constituency groups, to bring its members together for conversations on important matters. But the association's current executive and council think such an effort is incredibly important, and we are grateful that Professor Findlay has made the time to come to speak to us today, and indeed that you have come to be a part of this conversation. The association does its work of protecting and furthering the collective interests of the academic staff, the better that we all understand the potential and the dimensions of its role in assisting the academic staff in pursuing the academic mission at the university. And of course, even within the association, we have different views of this matter, right? So I think it's a delight for us to have an opportunity to consider this vital question, the role of the association, you know, with the, from the perspective of an outsider, right? An outsider's eyes to help. It is certainly an important moment for us to be giving attention to this issue when we face change, both actual and prospective, minor and drastic. Professor Findlay's talk today aims to help us devote attention to these questions by asking us to consider the larger contexts, both provincial and national, in which we are working, as well as our relationship to internal forces. Along with Rachel Milner, where's Rachel right now, who is currently the chair of the association's Teaching and Learning Committee. I first heard Professor Findlay speak just over a year ago at the Harry Crow Conference in Toronto. And I trust that Professor Findlay is about to furnish us with some necessary and indeed urgent provocations, which we should have a good amount of time to pursue in the question period. For now, I ask you to join me in welcoming Professor Findlay to rise and speak to us today.
My thanks were perhaps not audible, but they were sincere. So it's great to be back at the University of Alberta, and it's a bit daunting to be here at this particular historical moment. My assigned topic was the role of the association, and I thought there wasn't enough devilment in that, and I thought I would suggest a sexier or more seditious title. And then I thought, no, I'll go with my assigned topic. I won't annoy my instructor by trying to drift from the topic. So a couple of comments about this, because the key notion of association was what detained me and results in the observations and provocations that ensue. So, of course, there's more than one role. Indeed, there may be endless roles in proliferating contexts and multiple media on behalf of distinct members, cohorts, and constituencies. And there are 7 different categories within your association. And, of course, your association, its internal dynamics and its special legislative context. Special is perhaps a euphemistic word, but an Albertan legislative context is something you know far more about than I do, or at least you ought to. So why am I here? I'm not here as the itinerant smarty pants or snake oil salesman, here to tell you how things should be done, though I do promote excellence and activism as siblings born of the public interest in public institutions. Over the last several years, I've held the 2 roles of President of Academy 1, Arts and Humanities of the Royal Society of Canada, which might be seen as a locus of excellence, and also Chair of Academic Freedom and Tenure at CAUT, a place one might construe as a locus of activism. Activism and excellence seem to me not antonyms. If you're interested in the union, you must be an intellectual dud. That's how one of the arguments run, and the other that if you're interested, if you're consumed by inquiry in your disciplinary context, you love your intellectual work, there will be no time for the broader social and political context. It's against that kind of binarism that I try to work in and to promote at every opportunity. And so why should I care about what happens at the University of Alberta? Why should I care about what happens to you? Well, care I do about, and this is a very fine university. It doesn't mean it's invulnerable, but it's a very fine institution. And you are its most invaluable resource. You're not a problem. You're not a source you're not a money pit. You are at the heart of the institution. You are the institution. You represent the institution to multiple publics. And you need to act as though that is the case. And I'll be trying to urge you to, shall I say, recover your swagger and your sense of yourselves. So I associate myself with you, and so my presence with you here today. So here's the overview of what I'll do. I'll be looking at function and domain, the basics on academic freedom, institutional autonomy, and collegial governance, because all 3 are key to your association's business. I'll also look at the current context of fracking. I'll be talking about the Fracked Academy, and I will live up to that designation, I hope, as we go ahead, and look at federal, provincial, and institutional contexts. I'll also look at the power and pertinence of association, formal and informal, as a counter to divisiveness and unbridled competition. And finally, I'll turn to the operational and aspirational roles of academic staff associations, unionized and non-unionized. Now, so the basics. The idea of a university or an equivalent knowledge entity is ancient, pervasive, and persistent. Universities and their analogues derive in large part from 2 human impulses: the desire to know and the desire to control what knowledge can do or enable politically, economically, socially, ecologically, via circulation, application, mobilization, etc. The University of Alberta's first motto, which had been used by Franklin Marshall College in the States from the 1840s, was lux et lex, light and law. The impulse to inquire and the freedom that comes with that impulse, and the impulse to regulate, to codify, to substantiate, to require compliance. So lux et lex was the first motto of this institution, and it captures the kind of double impulses that I have characterized above. So the tension between time and place for reflection, Greek scholia as in school, and desire for control of reflection's outcomes, hegemony in our context, the interplay of schooling and hegemony in the names of stability, efficiency, accountability, etc. This tension is constitutive and never goes away. It defines the field of post-secondary inquiry and education. This tension determines the contingencies of inquiry and dissemination according to time, to place, and chronotope, the interaction, the configuration of temporal and spatial elements that constitute a scene, something that can be a unit of inquiry. And this is debated across academic disciplines, professional norms, and forms of local knowledge. Professional norms is a complicated site of freedom and entitlement, but also discipline and the constraints of peer review and so on. This new book from CAUT, Academic Freedom in Conflict, has a section with 3 essays about professional norms within it, and the whole collection is looking at the whole idea of what are the limits, who says what those limits are, and who polices the compliance with those limits in the academy in ways consistent with you as the bearers of knowledge and you as the bearers of responsibility. So this is debated across academic disciplines, professional norms, and forms of local knowledge. And the debate should never be extinguished because the university is, after all, a deliberative democracy, not a place for the training of poodles. So the basics, regularly respecifying and reflecting on institutional coordinates in time and space, where the university stands and how it stands, its connection to tradition and place. This is essential in a healthy institution committed to peer review. That is, understanding the current context or conjuncture is basic to sound daily operations and effective cyclical review. And this work is everybody's responsibility and opportunity, even and especially in the already gerbalized and now fracked academy, where overextension feeds self-subjection and being too busy for the association's business. When reporting and review occur, in these very basic points, the traditional roles of scholars, students, administrators, and governors reveal themselves along an axis of accountability, extending and ramifying out from inside the institution to its multiple outsides. And at such times, the institution's relative autonomy becomes apparent, as do the reasons for such autonomy and the reasons why association members should not romanticize that autonomy. Autonomy, as we know, means self-governance, and in its collegial forms should be well understood by all because it is so important to all and to the institution's core values and mission. We should understand this concept. Impediments to such understanding include apathy, overextension I mentioned already, careerist self-censorship. If I say something, maybe something bad will happen to me. There may be reprisals, and we live, I'm sorry to say, increasingly in a culture of academic reprisal. Paternalism, don't worry your head about it, we'll take care of it, trust us. Discouragement, a huge problem across Canada at the moment, and I've given talks like this in various places. So you can go to Algoma one day, small institution, you can go to Queen's the next day, and there is a common set of concerns and immense discouragement and fear for the project as we've understood it and inherited. There is intimidation too, and there are external players, corporate heft. Don't upset a major donor. The university can't afford it. I mean, what kind of conversation is that? And all of these, none of these dealing with these impediments, they all take work. And they all need work. Well, we need a life as well as a CV. And of course, the reduction of the academic life to a curriculum vitae is something that we know, and we're not guiltless in this. You're never good enough, as we'll see. And so we internalize all of this. So collegial governance is a distinctive set of rights and responsibilities existing in the more or less tense interface between freedom and control. External entities like governments, corporations, donors, accreditation boards, internal mediators, in the senior administration particularly, and groups invested in teaching, research, and community service. So my view is that everyone, no matter how grand or apparently marginal in the institution, has a governance role to play, some roles being unique to post-secondary institutions and some not. The primary distinguishing features are collegial governance of the academic domain and the academic agenda, the mediation of relations between academic staff and boards of governors by an administrative cadre composed mostly of erstwhile, active, invertebrate, or spectral academics. You know who they are. Academic staff, administrators, and governors each represent a distinct set of interests and duties which complement or conflict with each other. When things are going as they should, the work that these groups do is academic, enabling, and fiduciary, respectively. When things are going badly, domain creep from above or outside is usually the reason. This domain creep takes a number of forms, some of which you are clearly struggling with. For example, mandate and budgetary initiatives and letters of expectation in the name of Campus Alberta seem serious overreach, at least to an outsider like me. Shortly after the bar was raised rhetorically from above by the President via the 2020 presidential declaration, that is eminence by fiat, and it's only achievable through you, of course, via the 2020 presidential declaration. Soon thereafter, on the heels of this marketing hype and cosmic aspiration, then you get support withdrawn and then partially restored in apparently arbitrary and unsettling ways. It's now called across Canada the Lukashuk effect. I think that's notoriety, not celebrity, by the way. Meanwhile, institutions read routes via a brander's GPS. Niche marketing is obsessive and allegedly redemptive when it's a jungle out there. Well, the signifier jungle is a very interesting colonial and post-colonial history. And of course, jungles are one is resources of biodiversity, all sorts of things. But the idea of an unexamined academic Darwinism, which has us all panicked because we're not competitive enough. We're not the alpha predator in the current academic scene. And so at home, there's niche marketing endlessly. The University of Alberta is certainly not the University of Calgary, and it's not Lethbridge either, and it's not the collegial systems. And so from the local level through the provincial to the regional and the national level, there is intense competitiveness. If you look at the universities and colleges' websites across Canada, you'll see a sequence that went from mission statements, then to branding, and then to location. And now, when you look up a university, the first thing you will see is a series of claims or self-placements within rankings, within metrics of one sort or another. So that the university's identity, the first way in which it represents itself to the person who clicks on and gets to the site, the first way it does is through an ultra-competitive self-location within arbitrary metrics that are generated elsewhere and we think we have to comply with, or some of it, us at least, think we have to comply with. I used to think that the hockey tables in Maclean's every year were bad enough, but we go well beyond that. This in the home context. And then in the international field, we no longer have old growth internationalism, but recruiting after the clear cut. with homogenizing, when you draw all your students from one place, what you get is a homogenizing revenue stream used to remake priorities, redistribute resources, and install in consumer sovereignty and market logic as the new chronotype in the global present. It's all competitive in the global present, where institutional memory and collegial governance used to be. How many students coming from, for example, from the People's Republic of China are coming to read philosophy? How many of them are going into the art department? They are targeted in ways, and if the institution becomes dependent on those revenue streams will remake. They will instrumentalize on a global basis, and they will impact very negatively and dramatically on the actual diversity of the enterprise that you entered and within which you work. And this brings with it market-driven identity crises, metastatic self-loathing, and performance anxieties across the faculties. The anxious academy means the death of pleasure. We are all inadequate and inauthentic, all outperformed by others. And relief, however, comes via a branding consultant's version of in the beginning, in principia peculatus erat, or in the beginning was the fraudster, shyster, or forked tongue. And then there's all these, the Dairy Queen disease. I wake up in the morning and the University of Saskatchewan has a new crunchy topping drizzled across its unsuspecting surface. That we become something else. There's a new brand. Every day there's a new spike. And these are minor disturbances on the surface of an enduring enterprise. But they also are forms of alarmism and disfigurement. And so you have a Renaissance project underway. There was all the use of daring, the idea of daring to know, taking Immanuel Kant's injunction from Was ist Erklärung and saying, sapere aude, dare to know. And that daring to know, of course, brings a risk with us and gets us back to that doublet of freedom and restraint, freedom and discipline. But some of the deepest, some of the concepts that are most deeply rooted in our notions of cultural history, like the Renaissance, are like the idea of daring to know, are abducted from those contexts and are deployed as marketing mantras in ways that are an insult to our intelligence, I think. But the market-driven crisis. So what's wrong with tradition? Why is the university as you knew it not sexy enough? Why does it need new forms of defense and apology? Well, whatever is true can teach me. Quaecumque vera, your second motto. So the second motto since 1909 has local Basilian derivation from St. Joseph's College. And it is then in the university coat of arms, shortened and made more active and collective, while retaining the scholarly luster of Latin and the moral authority of St. Paul. So even if you don't have a department of classics, it's still okay to use the Latin, just to uncouple it from its antecedents. But the idea of whatever is true is still too permissive for some. The ominous indefiniteness of whatever, quaecumque, allows for truth in all its forms, all its trajectories, all its diverse outcomes, not only for the most fashionable or most lucrative of these. So if you've got a motto, live up to it. Either that or it's an empty slogan or an embarrassment that should be turfed. So domain creep leads to the following symptoms of decline and disarray in the name of a better brand, selling detergent, selling degrees. A leaner, in Saskatchewan, we're going through the lean project. What was involved in the shop floor in Toyota manufacture has now apparently discovered miraculous portability and applicability to things like tending to those who are sick or to getting those into the university who are sick in the sense that they're unreal in their expectations about what it is that they should be doing. So there's a lot of talk about lean going on, and talk about efficiency in a more global workplace. And or responsible managing of crisis. And the word crisis, whenever it comes up, should be the subject of instant and serious scrutiny. Is the crisis, who has claimed there is a crisis? Is it real? Open the books. Is it imagined? Why are you lying to me? Is it manufactured? Why would you imperil the university and the morale of those who work there by claiming a crisis where there is none? Because the word crisis, of course, gives a permission for to do something outside the traditions of collegial governance and the realities of collegial oversight. And you have managerial unilateralism. The more managers, the murkier. Features, and what does that managerialism do? Features late and little consultation, infantilized faculty, coercive collegiality and civility, rewards for those on message, but not for skeptics and critics. At the University of Saskatchewan, the senior administration grew by 40% while the faculty were shrinking. And this growth is attended by what I call the consultancy paradox. That is, if you're hiring people to the administration, senior administration within the university, it makes sense that you are growing an internal capacity to manage, to make responsible decisions about resources, to maintain good relationships with your faculty, students and staff. But just as there's been an extraordinary spike in the hiring and retaining of managers, so there has been a parallel growth of dependency on external consultants. So there's the growth of surveillance, and the people just get in the way often. It's other levels of reporting, other layers of surveillance, other burdens on the work of the faculty. And at the same time, when something nasty is being proposed, responsibility is offloaded or delegated to somebody who comes in. And so Alex Usher and all these other people, like circuit court judges without any kind of judgment at all, they go around the country and they go to meetings with senior administrators, and they give them the latest Dairy Queen topping within which will carry that particular kind of message. I have with me, this is a tiny thin book by Robert Dickerson, who wrote the prioritization book. This pamphlet costs $75. $75. The consultants, it's an enormously lucrative activity. And it is based on the crassest kind of formulations. How to engage faculty in academic program prioritization. The benefits of optimum faculty participation. Read obedience. Anticipating faculty resistance. Construing the faculty as docile or difficult. Understanding the sources of resistance. Plant your quislings carefully and let them report back to head office. Other complicating factors. And then he ends with a checklist. 28 tools for engaging faculty. You're being run by Canadian Tire and you don't know it. So what about the current conjuncture? Where is this stuff coming from? Well, it comes from the neoliberal hegemony of the moment. I call it brass knuckles and a nimbus, a kind of socially positioned claim to virtue, but the worst kind of bullying and thuggery that goes along with it, all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. Federally, we have the state's communications law room and its material, redaction, muzzling, spin, and smear, from Chief Teresa Spence in Victoria Island in Ottawa during her fast, to Chief Justice McLaughlin, distinguished alumna of the U of A. Bad inclusivity, the budget as bundling and bungling, foreign aid as trade, and NGOs as corporate alibis and forced allies. Economism eats value, including academic value. And I am prompted to ask, what has been happening to our country? But this is being replicated among the academic leadership in this country. The Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada and the U15 ape the Prime Minister's office and its provincial clones. We shift from the liberal to the neoliberal arts while enforcing campus law and order. The university's bloated war room and its materiel, opaque partnerships, directive donors, secret searches, stigmatizing and silencing, all in the name of the brand. The sad coercions of strategic planning, the venality of internationalization, not open to the world, but in that world in a predatory and paternalistic way, looking for revenue, tuition revenue in particular. And the imminent intellectual desertification and species loss in non-compliant or unprofitable places. Who gets, this is not an even impact across diversity. This is a singling out of areas as inadequately lucrative or so yesterday. History is so yesterday. Academic economism and program prioritization eat academic value hitherto preserved and produced as diverse, independent inquiry, distinctive teaching, dissemination, outreach, quaicumque vera, some might say. So, towards Harper U and the state and its collegium, what does Harper do? Stacking the Senate and fracking the nation, except for nation, in the politics of Canadian division and Aboriginal disunity. The university, stacking our senates and fracking the academy in the race for resources and repute that produces winners and losers in the collegium. Harper, interpolating the citizen as mean-spirited taxpayer, selfish, suburban, and scared. The university, hailing good faculty as siloed, self-maximizing careerists, teacher scholars as targets for de-skilling or worse. I'm just warming up, by the way. How about tough on thought crime? Are we looking, where do we look? Do we look for collegial or managerial autonomy? A necessary protection of collegial governance or internal autocracy and external co-option? Why, I ask, CAUT is deeply imperfect, so am I, and everybody else who serves on it. It needs all sorts of work. But why are many university administrators, and even some individual staff and regional associations, why do they reproach CAUT as the threat to their autonomy when it is a potential ally? Why do such critics appeal to institutional autonomy rather than the academic freedom of individual faculty? And the individual faculty member as a rights-bearing knowledge producer is the key here, and arguably the most at risk, as a key guarantor of institutional and academic integrity. Such autonomy should serve the institutional autonomy must serve academic freedom as expressed by CAUT and entrenched in collective agreements, not in university policy or AUCC statements like the new one on academic freedom, which is weaker and more instrumental and suspiciously silent more than its predecessor. And the key is, if managerially driven, institutional autonomy tends increasingly to become internally limiting and externally abject. The institution is both sovereign and for sale, with autocratic academic managers doubling as corporate shills. So what we are talking about is hollow autonomy. Hollow autonomy escapes collegial oversight while pleading financial exigency or peerless vision, i.e. the chance to shrink or eliminate disciplines while preserving bureaucratic bloat, quail leadership muscle, and corporate connectedness. I need all my people. Meanwhile, academic freedom is constrained or violated by exclusion, termination, casualization, and of course, precariousness. And so the association in context has to contend with the politics of division, with the university redefining itself in terms of market status and the academic commodity that it purveys, entering into asymmetrical partnerships. There's nothing wrong with partnerships in principle and in many actual cases, but a lot of them are skewing. It's public risk for private benefit. There are all sorts of constraints on the disclosure and circulation of research. The stigmatizing of cooperation. I've been working for a number of years on the notion of the cooperative university because competitive is an unexamined, uninflected signifier without nuance which springs to the lips of our leaders too readily. We've got to be more competitive. Well, really? We're back with academic Darwinism in a travesty of Darwin as well. And then there's the fear of mobilization. You know, we don't want anybody being arrested. While all around us in Canadian society, outside the mainstream media particularly, there are all sorts of modes of resistance, the work of transformation and resistance. Wonderful, not Rage Against the Machine, but Sage Against the Machine, a wonderful Aboriginal one, being truth to power. So I look to things like Idle No More, and I look to our students. If we can practice a new intergenerational politics that makes allies of our students and us allies of them, if we can have a new kind of contract between faculty, academic staff and students, I think that we're beginning to create the conditions for effective pushback. And of course, Idle No More started at the University of Saskatchewan campus. 4 young women decided they'd had enough and that the Navigable Waters Act and the other things, measures bundled into the budget C-35 was just an outrage. So universities should be home for young people currently vilified, both for their alienation and for their engagement. The Red Square movement reprises the Quiet Revolution. It's not lucide, mais solidaire. And of course, the Red Square movement suggests that there were unfulfilled promises of free tuition. Canada is an enormously rich country. Canada, in my view, is not a generous country. And it is particularly ungenerous to Indigenous and its young people. The affordability. You know, I was just in Denmark. Having a meeting with Jim Turk's equivalent in Copenhagen while I was at a conference. And she said, whoever's in power in Denmark, right wing or left wing, it doesn't matter. The idea of free tuition, no one can go there. It is absolutely central. Look to Norway. Well, Norway has all the oil and stuff. Okay. This is about choices. This is about valuing young people. This is about valuing the crucial institutions that give them 2 things: economic agency and the capacity for critical citizenship. If you reduce it to the one, economic agency, you're missing out on the other obligation that helps to make young people educated rather than trained. They're not here learning to labor. They're citizens in formation, not consumers in full bloom. But that particular distinction is regularly elided or violated. And Idle No More, which reprises resistance to the notorious White Paper of 1969, this time opposing not an effort to emulate civil rights gains in the name of equality, but a federal budget virulently neo-colonial, and Minister a real blockhead, Minister Duncan, who during Atawapiskat said to Chief Spence and her supporters, well, you've just got to learn to act at the speed of business. Not multiple temporalities, not multiple histories, not the interaction of different kinds of agenda. Act at the speed of business. Idle no more, my own campus, under the leadership of its Aboriginal president, recently re-elected with an equally feisty graduate student association body, that the university student leadership has been radicalized and mobilized by the enormity and stupidity and unfairness and lack of necessity for what is coming in. And out of this, of course, the administrative claim, our president says, it will be difficult, but we will emerge stronger. Who believes that? How achievable is that? Explain to me how that works as you're whacking the faculty and screwing the students and jacking up the tuition. How does it work? I must be thick. Tell me how it, explain to me how it works. Believe me is the answer to that particular kind of question. So our students in our faculty council stood up and the president announced a vote unanimously passed by his executive of non-confidence in this prioritization process. The room performed the realities of what I call the cleft collegium. Half of the room, faculty and students, erupted in thunderous, sincere and protracted applause. Everyone in the senior, the deanery and up sat there in silence because their bosses were in the room, the president and the provost. What does that tell you about the university as a deliberative democracy? What does that tell you about scripting? What does that tell you about whipping the administrative vote in the very chambers where we should all be free to make the message better by critiquing and dissenting and obstructing, but also supporting when necessary? So the doubleness of that response spoke volumes. The fact that this had been, the fact that the students had done this, well, let's go to the university website. Not a trace of it there. Not a trace of it there. That is, any site in which the brand managers were in control of access and content, that was the old story. Or a student got this, a student got that. We're rethinking about increasing scholarships. So the voice of the students is not sought, and it is devalued when it's off message. But what this has done is triggered all sorts of faculty and community resistance to the process and media interest, despite the best efforts of administrators to enforce their triple whammy for students. Pay more, get less, be grateful. Students exercising, however, their expressive freedoms and tuition clout, this plays better with the public. This is a fairness issue. This is a future issue. And the future and fairness, when they go together, can be a powerful mix. And this plays better with the public than what are perceived as the minor grievances of a pampered guild. That would be us in public. The hammock for the summer, job securities to die for, extensive salaries, blah, blah, blah. When students act as more than consumers light, the fracking has to stop and broader solidarities can and do develop. Fairness trumps privilege, and quality in and as diversity takes over from alignment with externally imposed institutional priorities. Either of that, either we mobilize, or austerity U is fracked. And what do I mean by fracking? That is, I think it's more and more subject to an extractive model tied to a reductive theory of value. Universities and colleges' residual educational potential, and how often is the word education used by senior administration? Research, competitiveness, external dollars, all of that. But that old and apparently deeply unsexy word, education, is a rarity in high-level discourse, a very revealing absence in my view. So you have universities and colleges' residual educational potential is pressured by what I call consultant slurry and corporate toxins whose names and nature are withheld for commercial reasons. So many private agreements whose conditions we do not know for commercial reasons. But because of the competitiveness of the private sector is mapped onto and migrates into the very heart of the publicly funded university. And with little heed to knowledge economies within the alternative chronotope of the Anthropocene, the bigger conversations, the connection to, the belief in the ways in which every discipline across our diversity is working in ways to rethink our relationship to our world and what the people, the creatures, the life forms that we share it with. And in the midst of all of this, little sign of the honour of the Crown and the duty to consult. So the Aboriginal dimension in our own university, 2 weeks ago, there was a funding announcement, and you know how those go. So the press are there, the press is there, the VP Research made the announcement with the Mining Institute. You may have heard of artists in residence. Now we have an executive in residence from the mining industry. They disclose a whole series of funding commitments, not the details of this, but funding commitments. And at the end of it, a woman called Candice Paul from English River First Nation stood up and said, when are you going to start speaking to us before you start poisoning our land? And the whole party on the platform turned their backs on this First Nation woman and marched off to the reception. So the shunning of Candice Paul has become a moment of mobilization and resistance. And the pointing to the racist components, the neo-colonial imperatives behind so many dimensions of the extractive economy. So it's the academy, stupid. I want the T-shirts to be widely distributed. Or not the economy, it's the academy, stupid. Our staff associations have the resources to make the argument for the academy and its students most effectively. We have institutional memory and understanding of the histories of institutions, disciplines, and professions. We have unrivaled access to analysis of conditions on the ground across our institution, and thanks to our colleagues. We know the follies of picking winners and intellectual overmanagement. We know that indeterminacy is not a bad word. It is our constant companion in our inquiry, in our pedagogy. Will this be a good class? The sound of professorial knees knocking in the corridors at the beginning of term tells us we never know. We're always anxious. But it's a good anxiety. It's not the induced anxiety of the academic precariat. It is the anxiety about what we're going to do, the fact that we don't know how well it would turn out, but we want it to turn out. Our investment in that particular situation. Instead of learning outcomes, instead of the metrics, instead of the drab depreciation of the subtleties of what we do in the interests of accounting rather than true accountability. And it's your association, stupid. AASUA is not necessarily the docile extension of a court culture, nor is it an alibi for autocracy or a sanctuary for failed academics. It is a place for the productive performance of difference and for strategically collective action. A place, what you do in the association is intellectual work, invaluable intellectual work. It's not something ancillary to your real work. It's part of your real work. Because, as Caroline was saying, the university is a locus of inquiry. It must also be a focus of inquiry. Where is the knowledge coming from? What are the conditions of its production and circulation? What notions of benefit are in there too? The association is there for the embattled individual, but also for the genteel, the squeamish, the radical, and it's there for the public good. This is a publicly funded institution. Canada's system is a public post-secondary education. It's envied across the world. What's your problem with it? The problem is that it gives luster to the category of the public. When the virulence of the private is always supposed to be smarter, more efficient, and so on. So hope you're glad that you have your association and that you make it as you think it needs to be for you in this institution, for all Albertans and for all who come here. I hope also that you refuse to become minor players in an ultra-instrumental neo-Wagnerian opera, Das Amrheinghost. I think that you should be wary of that particular, because the instruments will ones you won't enjoy playing, and the arias will be ones that you've heard the last too often already. So good luck, and remember that sometimes ein is kein, one is none, and you therefore need to be able to act together your divergent interests, sharpening your struggle for common academic and social goals beyond gentility and beyond squeamishness. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that very encouraging and very funny talk. I wanted to ask about something that you said towards the end. You had that wonderful phrase about the problem with the university is it adds luster to the idea of the public, which I think is just so true and really beautifully put. And one of the things I guess, I don't know what kind of a question this is. Maybe this is a question about what do you think and also what do you know. One of the things that I often think when we hear so much about how important private donation is and how important it is, the Office of Advancement, blah, blah, blah. And I think that it seems to me what they often do is they add a tiny little dollop of funding on the top of just a massive bucket of public funding. And then, but the whole thing gets called the so-and-so family, whatever. And they go...
Or the Tallis building.
Or the Tallis building. So it's as if, and so there becomes this picture as if the university is actually privately funded when it's overwhelmingly publicly funded. So if you wanted to speak to that, but I've also often wondered, is somebody doing research about that? I just would so often like to know, can we show across the long term who pays the heating bill for the Tallis building? Who makes sure when the carpet gets worn out, who replaces it? It's the public who does all of that. So can we measure, is there some place where we could measure, for example in Alberta, amount of money that Albertans have given to the University of Alberta, amount of money that private donation, and so this constant drumbeat of how attentive and solicitous we have to be to private money could sort of be spoken against. And I wonder if anybody has done some of that research.
There's a lot on this. CAUT has a policy on naming. Because we think that philanthropy should be unconditional. Anything else is directive donorship, and there is a basic distinction between those two. My president doesn't like me referring to the University of Saskatchewan as a strip mall under rotating ownership. That doesn't seem to be very good for the brand. But everywhere I go, the name of a great athlete or a distinguished scholar in the history of the institution is overlaid or displaced by a corporate logo. And the logo cops are out all the time selling off parts of the public institution in the interests of naming, the purchase of an unearned immortality on the cheap, I think. If you are giving something, I mean, we know lots about the philosophy and the culture of the gift, not only in anthropology, but in many other disciplines too. Is this coming with strings? And will those strings hamstring us in our ability to do our jobs? Well, in that situation, what you have is the disproportion, the asymmetries of recognition. All our universities are paid for by the tax dollars of ordinary Canadians. Even those who don't directly come to university are beneficiaries of our public post-secondary system. And so therefore, the idea of lionizing the external donor, I don't want to discourage philanthropy, but it should be philanthropy. I don't want to discourage that, but I don't want us to, as you say, overlay the public durable support with sporadic generosity and gifts from the outside. And what has happened is that our senior, at least in my university, our senior administration prefer to schmooze with potential donors than to talking to faculty like me. Can you imagine that? Who would spurn the opportunity for a tete-a-tete with Len Findlay? I mean, it's just going to be so plain sailing, right? No, but they go outside, and what they have lost is the appetite and the capacity to make the public case for the public investment in our public system. Many of the difficulties that we have would disappear tomorrow if people would reinvest. I spent 3 years as senior policy analyst on universities for the government of Saskatchewan, not this government of Saskatchewan. I'm not holding my breath for my advice to be sought by the Wall administration, but in an earlier one. And in that situation, it became very clear to me, very clear indeed, that if the argument was made, and I saw how the university was working its interface with the provincial government, and how important it was for them to believe they respected me as an academic, and I was in the public service, and I did have tenure. I wrote speeches for 7 different ministers of post-secondary education, or whatever we were calling that portfolio that day, in the revolving door of post-secondary education. I wrote speeches for all of them. None of them had the guts to deliver them verbatim, because they all went through the Treasury and came back to me with a red pencil through all of my more aspirational moments in the document. But they were dependent. They didn't know what the university was. They knew it was important, and they knew it deserved support, but they counted on us. That is, they performed a good dependency as legislators on the educators and the institution. What we are performing now, we've substituted for that good dependency of government on the academy, the bad dependency of the academy on external donors. That's where the shift has gone. And what we need to do is an inventory of the multiple dependencies of the institution inside and outside, and then a sifting through of these so that we can say we can get back to reactivating, redeploying, and rebranding the public as the defining feature of our post-secondary system. It's an uphill battle. The work is important, but in some ways we're our own worst enemies. Look at a directive, look at a master text, like your cumulative curriculum vitae. Look in there. Not look up, look way up, but look down, look way down. And you'll find things like community service. That is, we do not value, as colleagues, the performance of our colleagues in the interest of making the necessary, concerted, public argument for the public system and the restoration of the funding that would give us security, that would remove us from the embarrassing mendicancy and groveling gratitude of our leaders whenever there is a new gift. A new gift like the one I described, where Candace Paul was shunned. The mining industry make a donation to the university, nothing wrong with that. What are the strings? We're not allowed to know. And when a voice of dissent from the territory speaks up, you turn around. So what was performed there in the shunning of Candace Paul was the inability or the impatience or the incapacity and behind of those who make these decisions to actually account for them. I was one of 3 people recently who appeared before our Board of Governors. We submitted a 5-page critique with the public interest and the public institution at the heart of our critique about this new program prioritization and cutting process. We met with the Board of Governors. I couldn't recognize, since I was last in the room, boy, they must have been watching those TV shows about Renaults. I mean, the whole place is transformed. It's really glitzy. They put all this money into it. The Board of Governors listened to us, and then we were ushered out. They couldn't enter into a conversation with us. Why? because they were experiencing their own inauthenticity, I think, on the inside. They were in an academic place where they have they have a role there, they have a fiduciary responsibility, but the academic agenda is ours. The academic values are ours to define, to defend, and to live by. And they feel they're awkward, but their sense of awkwardness is a preliminary concealment of the inauthenticity that is underneath that. And that inauthenticity, in my view, can be reactivated if the university says, with its board of governors, who are largely government appointees, that they can say, let's get our government to reinvest in the public institution. Because what's happening across the country at the moment is that in boom provinces like Saskatchewan, never thought I'd say that, boom provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta, the ideology of austerity is as clamorous as it is in New Brunswick or anywhere else. This is not about the state of the provincial economy. This is about a conservative, mass, neoliberal restructuring of the post-secondary public project as Canadians have understood it, stood by it, been proud of it, and overwhelmingly paid for it. That is what's happening. And the sooner we recognize that that is an ideological battle. I'm often accused of politicizing the academy. My response is, the academy is always already political. All I want to do is to draw attention to the fact that there is a politics that pre-exists my presence, and I want to change that politics. I am not politicizing, I'm attempting to repoliticize in the directions and in the interests of the public, and to demystify, and in some cases displace, the ideology of the private as the superior signifier. That's a bit of a long answer, sorry.
So many answers to that question. Many answers to many things. So other questions? Yes.
I just wanted to thank you for your eloquent hilarity, which lifted me from the utter despair I think I found myself in, like many of us. And you may know that we've had many, many cuts in the Faculty of Arts. They've all been very arbitrary. They've been this voluntary severance package, which means that departments have been devastated of some of their most productive and colleagues, and for completely, you know, there just seems to be no method, and just mad austerity as the instruction. And meanwhile, our administration, just yesterday, there was an article about the University of Calgary president. She now makes $999,000, and one of my colleagues at the University of Calgary pointed out that she was probably wearing her loot suit in the photograph. So this ongoing increase in the management and in their funding that is completely unapologetic. It just, you know, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just voicing my despair. And not very long ago, the incoming chair of English and Film Studies asked a question of our president in a recent public address, and said that asked what she thought about the fact that first she's advocating top 20 in 2020, this competitive mode of assessing our work and our departments, and the University of Alberta in one of those has number 22 internationally or something like that. And then through the voluntary severance, we lost about a fifth of our department. And how could you explain that? And she said, oh, well, over to you, pointing to the provost, who came and said, oh, I spent this year traveling endlessly around the world looking for innovative solutions to our problems in the universities, and I came up with, you know, go out and find sources of funding yourself. That's my very expensive solution for you. Yeah. So it was just like shocking. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm just expressing my despair, and I'm so glad everyone is here listening and talking. And also, I was out with other people on the legislative steps with students, and you know, and we went into the legislature, we sat there, we listened to them, we watched Alison Redford, you know, investigate her manicure, while you know, people were talking about very serious issues. It was a very, very dispiriting context. So I'm near retirement, but I'm still very active and engaged, and I really want to fight back. I have a blog I started a number of years ago that's called Dear Indira Samasakura, when she was very interested in the honorary degree for the head of Nestle's. And I put up all this stuff. I just keep adding to it all the time. You know, she's just yesterday. It's announced she's on the board of Magna, and also on the board of a bank, and all. You know, it just seems totally insane. Anyway, I will just stop.
Well, I did mention, Janice, market status and the academic commodity. That was a one line, and in the neoliberal academy. The salary of administrators is wrapped up in the free market, allegedly free market inevitabilities of executive compensation. That is how it is construed and how it is justified, if it is questioned at all. The idea is that in order to get good people at the top, you've got to pay top dollar. Jim Turk, who's just stepping down as executive director of CAUT, has done a kind of informal study of university and college presidents over the last 20 years. And he thinks we now have, with one or two exceptions, the worst, most mediocre cast of characters that we've ever had. And one instance of the mediocrity is the fact that they don't believe in the public project. And as a result, they're faintly embarrassed by it. And that's why I talked about living between gentility and squeamishness and getting beyond both of them. Well, the gentility starts at the top, and it's a kind of corporate gentility. And the squeamishness, it's so vulgar to be associated with mobilization, with labor organization, with the idea of academic work. We are workers. We're not only that. We are workers. It's there in homework. It's there in the homework that brought us into the professoriate in the long run. And so there's been a discursive displacement of all the terms with all their nuance and with all their intrigue and opacity by which we used to try and describe ourselves. Not particularly, but that's been displaced by these market certitudes. This is inevitable, this is certain, this is how the world is, we've got to compete on these grounds. And in the middle of this, you get the massive, there are two growths. There's the growth in the administrative salary, and there's the growth in the body of the administrators. And so both of those feed into a sense of entitlement and a self-distanciation from the academic and the educational and the things that matter to us. So and then there's and then you've got about 2 or 3 headhunting firms across this country make all the decisions. And of course there's only a certain shelf life for an unappointed administrator with aspirations to the big job, so they've got to move their merchandise. And in order to move their merchandise, they target particular selection committees. And of course, it used to be that if somebody wanted to be your dean or your provost, they'd turn out to the assembly, they'd listen to the cogency and the craziness of one's colleagues when there's somebody in the room who's running for an influential job. And we believed that was a deliberative democracy, that the applicant was in the agora and was accountable to us. That has gone. Why? Because of the executives shouldn't be seen to be looking for a job in another corporation. It might imperil their tenure where they are. So here's another importation of a corporate model into the academy. And the more that you grow your dependency on the corporate donor, the more pervasive and more damaging and more necessary to resist and replace becomes the neoliberal imperative.
Thanks, Ed. Go ahead. Another question.
Yeah, I guess my only question would be how to heal those kinds of neoliberal rifts which are in associations themselves, that exist among faculty themselves.
Yeah.
I think that's, I think what you're saying about administration is absolutely clear, but I think within our own bodies we have very similar kinds of divisions and identifications.
Yeah. Now, we like to think it's a very good question. And I'm not sure that I've got an answer for you, but I'm going to try and answer as best I can. That we want to think of the collegium as a big tent with certain kinds of commonalities that we can all identify and subscribe to. But in fact, because of certain historical priorities and the resource distribution patterns, say 30 years ago and so, some people have always been disproportionately big beneficiaries when the operating budget comes to the academy. What has happened, in my view, is that those differences, which were tolerated, somebody gets a market supplement in law, somebody in accounting has a differential kind of thing because of the invocation of a market reality. Now that arguably defensible appeal to a market reality has now become an unrelenting clamor, the perpetual invocation of market realities in order to justify ever-deepening divisions within the academy. In my view at the moment, we are watching through research chairs, research centers. We are looking at the creation of an academic labor aristocracy, and we're about to have the de-skilling, downsizing and instrumentalizing of an academic precariat. So there will be, just as there's aggravated inequality in neoliberal societies, so we will aggravate the inequalities within. And they also have an additional advantage, which is to create the conditions of dissension that facilitate a policy of divide and rule. So that rather than having the collegial view of things and taking a collective and common approach, we are urged to be ungenerous with each other. That is the bottom line, it seems to me, here. And that is the unguarded conversation, the idea that you don't tell somebody something because they might steal your idea. In many cases, it would be an example of petty larceny, one fears. But someone will steal your idea. That we're so guarded that the arts of, it's possessive individualism, as McPherson would have called it. Not Ian McPherson, C.B. McPherson. That there's a sense here in which you have to look at the transformation of academic sociability. I mean, it's happening in all these levels. And so you envy or resent or fear the person who has all the resources that you're not getting. And one of the things that happens with program prioritization is that that being a small department is either a signifier of elite rarity or it is a property of imminent vulnerability. So some of our small departments are being whacked and eliminated. Others are being nourished in all sorts of incredibly lavish ways. How do you determine that? Well, you determine that on the basis of priorities. And those priorities are cooked up in one place and then they're applied across the academy. And people say, well, there's no rhyme and reason to that. But the metric that was applied is there to isolate. I mean, a lot of what we do, we used to have lines of inquiry. Now we have fabrics of interdependency. We've woven this fabric in which we work with people in other areas, other departments, and so on. That should mean that isolating programs is impossible and undesirable because we've had integrated planning and the integration has worked. Or the integration didn't work. And the meaning of everything that's come down to us, the meaning is not transformation. The meaning is compliance with the directive. That is, what we do is perform the conditions of our compliance rather than use a new concept as a new site on which to reimagine the project in which we, the members of our department, and our colleagues in other areas are working. And so divide and rule has been pushed as far as possible so that when I speak about partnerships, external partnerships, a colleague in chemistry says, well, I'm working with this. I mean, I have this. And so the temptation is for you to say I'm jealous or that I don't understand. Do you want me to give up my research program? So the framing that comes from the top is the framing that creates division and distrust and envy and recrimination. So the notion of an academic community, how quaint a notion. Community, it's such a warm, fuzzy signifier. Who's against community, right? But academic community is a farce at the moment. It's like hollow autonomy. Behind it all lies despair, resentment, bewilderment. Why? The cult of academic celebrity, again. I mean, I go into a room with my colleagues. All I think is the room is stuffed with people who know things I don't know. This is a knowledgeable community, a knowledge community. But then I go and sit in council and I hear the president or a VP research saying, this area is underperforming with the granting councils. This area is bringing us a shame and dishonor because people have lost their NSERC grants and so on. We're on the skids. The apocalyptic rhetoric cranks up. And you're supposed to go home and cook supper and feel good about yourself, you know? And you know, we're a self-lacerating tribe anyway. No one can tell. So it just aggravates these tendencies. So you're isolated in your own predicament of underperformance, and you're isolated in a way that means at times you will blow up. You'll say the wrong sort of thing to somebody. Somebody says, could you help me with this? Could you read this manuscript? Well, it used to be sure, or you'll have to wait a little, and now it's get lost. I mean, people are being exhorted to a kind of careerism that is unproductive because another set of eyes and another conversation will make a class discussion better, will make a manuscript or an experiment or whatever. It improves our intellectual work. So in fact, the exhortation to possessive individualism is also, it's not about excellence. It's about the end of excellence. And if they have their way and they pick winners and they target the resources, because the 3 granting councils, we've done analysis at CAUT of who's on the 3 granting councils now, and it's stuffed with the people who are on our boards of governors. It is the same people who want public risk for private advantage. They want to bring us to heel. And in a cowed country like Canada at the moment, where public science is muzzled, where public servants are anxious for their job, just go to Ottawa, feel not the love, feel the fear in Ottawa. In that situation, we are the last holdout. And that's why the universities have got to be brought to heel. And that's why here's an opportunity for compliance that we must resist, and we can only resist it by working together for a collective good and the public interest.
Great. Carolyn.
Len, I love your idea that one of the roles of the association is to be sort of the source of academic values, right? That we should be defining what academic values are. This is now my 5th year involved with the association. My 2nd year as chair of the academic faculty committee. And one thing, you know, the more I get into it, the deeper my involvement, the greater my appreciation for just how hard those of us who are immediately involved with the association are working. So one of the challenges for us, of course, is you know, to keep from not letting ourselves be confined within jumping from immediate problem to immediate problem as they come at us from the administration, but trying to find ways to envision how we can actively set a program for ourselves, right? Yes. So I'm thinking maybe we need to take back the very idea of program prioritization, right? And establish for ourselves what are key elements of all of the work of the association? How do we prioritize the right thing? And so I guess partly my question is to you is to say, what advice do you have on this front, right? Like, how do we go about that really immense task of trying to shift ourselves out of firefighting, right, and dealing with our immediate tasks, of course, the most important of which is always bargaining on behalf of our members, right, grieving on behalf of our members and so on, right? So how do we get to the more difficult things that would actually ultimately, if we could manage them well, achieve all of our objectives all the better? And then I would actually love to open that question up to those who are here, Absolutely. Right? So what would you like to see the association prioritizing at this moment? And because, you know, the array of challenges before us is just quite significant, right? So I think it would be of great help to have a keener sense of what our members think we should be prioritizing. So it's a double question. One, back to Len again. What advice can you give us on that front? But Also, I just wanted to open it up to others if they wanted to speak to that.
Give your association resources. Academics can be cheap, as we know. They can act as though they're still graduate students and say, well, their society ups its dollars $10 and there's panic and the threat of secession and so on. And we get this at CAUT as well, to which your association is a generous supporter. But some things require resources. And you've got to use your own money as one of the components of your capacity to redefine the project, to have your programs, to have to go. And of course, if you ask for a dues increase, that turns the gaze of the membership on you in a skeptical or in a deeply hostile way. And both of those are productive of thinking. And so you should have an answer ready. You should meet the gaze of a skeptical membership by undertaking the difficult conversation with those competing loyalties and agendas within the collegium and suggest, look, this is going too far. I mean, when the rest of Canada watched what Lukaszek did, what happened was the performance of what's happening elsewhere increasingly, which is how do you make an apple into an orange? What you do is you call it the apple of austerity, and you withdraw from the operating budget large chunks of change, and you make it the orange of opportunism by its mysterious restoration in places that matter to you. And what has happened in this is a shift from collegial oversight and collegial discretion of the decision about what warrants support within the institution, and father now knows best. It happens outside, so you get excision and restitution. And it's never the same. There's always loss involved, but the loss is multiple. The loss is a loss of, in some areas as opposed to other areas, but the loss is the loss of control, the loss of ownership of the resource agenda within your own, and the understanding of why decisions are made in particular kinds of ways. So I would say, I wouldn't say quadruple your dues. It would be easy to me. I would just be that itinerant smarty pants I said I wasn't if I suggested that. But I think pay more. Ask yourself, what are your dues going to? What is the operational part of this? How do protecting the compensation and benefits conditions of each of you is an invaluable part of the association's activity. But that is in the level of the urgent and the particular and the inviolable. But beyond that, beyond the four corners of the collective agreement, who do you belong to? What kind of movement are you? What kind of professional cadre are you? Do you have an aspirational dimension to your self-understanding within the institution? Or is all that happening afterwards, after you leave the precincts of campus? On campus, you're a prole, you're a drone, you're compensated, you're precarious, or you're secure, but that's all you are. Or do you take that aspirational dimension inside and say, how could we support? How can we bring in the students? How can we see the student interest as in fact convergent with, if not identical to ours? How can we take the student interest and the idea, how it's framed is student tuition versus professorial salaries? That's how it's framed at the moment. That is, they are paying for us, therefore they should exercise consumer sovereignty, they should call the shots on curriculum, and so that instead of citizens for information, students become cranky consumers. How can we get beyond that? We have to move outside that notion of cash to a nuanced sense of value, and that sense of value, with more nuance to it, has an operational and an aspirational sense. I'm paying $10 more, for example, in order that we put together programming that will empower, entitle, give voice and audience to our members in all the diversity of aptitude and need that can help us develop the platform, help us to fashion and disseminate the message that we want to do, because we're drowned in the neoliberal clamor around us within the institution as well as beyond it. So pony up.
Any comments from the audience on this particular subject? Because there is that opportunity from the question. Yeah? Okay. Well, I think at this point, I just want to make an announcement that we will be moving over to the faculty club, and those who can would be certainly welcomed if you have additional questions for Len. And then the other thing I want to obviously say is that thank you so much, Len, for an excellent talk, and you really inspired us. Thank you.